You must eat within an hour of waking up if you have hypoglycemia. Consequences of hypoglycemia for your quality of life, your quality of consciousness, your ability to get things done, your health, your longevity, your aging is massive, despite it being completely ignored. It just blows my mind how infrequently insulin is tested. But basically, the reason it's completely ignored is because unless it happens as a result of some kind of medication, it's never life-threatening from their point of view. There is definitely a lot of evidence that skipping dinner is better. There's no evidence that skipping breakfast is ever better. You're not going to want to try it. Everyone with hypoglycemia doesn't have appetite in the morning. But at the very least, you won't have as much appetite. And if it's really bad, not only will you not have appetite, you might well have nausea in the morning. Where does that come from? It comes from an excess of stress chemicals.
Welcome to the Rejuvenate podcast. I'm your host, Chrissy Hawks, and I'm here with my co-host, Elwin Robinson. And today we are talking about blood sugar, particularly hypoglycemia and insulin resistance. So Elwin, tell me, why this subject? Why today?
Well, Chrissy, this is something that I've actually struggled with for a long time, and I've only really recently realized how much it's been a struggle for me and how much it's undermined my health. I'll tell you a quick story about this. So 3 years ago, back when I was really struggling with various symptoms, which I've talked about before, digestive and anxiety, and I lost lots of weight, all that kind of stuff. One of the things that was happening is that, a few hours after a meal, I'd feel so weak and shaky, which is like classic hypoglycemia symptoms, which we'll get into. And so I started testing my blood sugar. And although it was like a low end of the range, it wasn't anywhere near a problem. Sometimes it wasn't even that low end of the range. But I remember once it was below the low end of the range. It was really bad. I think, it's supposed to be at least 4 by this unit of measurement, and it was 3. So I thought that was really bad. So I contacted not emergency, but, just like a clinic thing, and asked them if this is an issue. And they basically were like, don't worry about it. Just eat regularly to stop it from happening. Eat sugar, Not that's always bad advice. We'll talk about that, but that was their advice. And I was interested in that. And it took me a long time to actually fully grasp why they don't care about hypoglycemia. And so I think this video is very important. First of all, a lot of people suffer from hypoglycemia. Second of all, as we'll go into, the consequences of hypoglycemia for your quality of life, your quality of consciousness, your ability to get things done, your health, your longevity, your aging is massive, despite it being completely ignored. And why is it completely ignored? I guess we'll get more into technicalities of it. But basically, the reason it's completely ignored is because unless it happens as a result of some kind of medication, it's never life-threatening from their point of view, or pretty much never life-threatening. And therefore, because it's not life-threatening, they're like, it's like, call me again when the blood sugar's too high, right? That's something that your body won't automatically correct itself. But basically, when your blood sugar gets too low, at some point, yes, the body will automatically correct itself. And because of that, they think it's not a real problem, but just eat frequently to stop it happening. That's the mainstream medical perspective. And so, for want of knowing anything better, that's what I took on when I was much younger, and that's what I understood. And to be honest, when I talk to a lot of people, even in this natural health world, about their situation, and a lot of them do talk about hypoglycemia, that's pretty much still the advice that they're following a lot of the time. They're either doing that or they've gone the opposite direction with like keto and intermittent fasting, which we'll talk about. But most commonly, I just hear, very frequent meals being the thing that people do. Otherwise, they feel it. So, yeah, I know that's a little bit diving straight into it, and I know we'll go back to basics, but because I see so many people suffering with it, and as you know, Chrissy, we've been planning this episode for a long time, and I kept saying, I don't want to do it until I know everything there is to know, and I want to understand it, because there's at least 3 different schools of advice, all of which have a complete philosophy to explain why you should do it their way, and each of them being kind of completely different, opposite in some ways, and each of them claiming amazing results. And so I had to understand, how is it possible that they could both be right when they're saying the exact opposite. So that's why it's taken me a while to really get to grips with this. So if you've wondered about that, that would be another good reason to keep watching, keep listening. So this is a very, very important topic. And of course, the obvious answer, which I saved till last, is hypoglycemia is usually the first step along the way to blood sugar dysregulation. Then you tend to have issues of insulin resistance, which we'll talk about next, which relates to weight gain and all kinds of other things that people find undesirable. And then, of course, if that dysfunction continues, it can lead to type 2 diabetes, which is a potentially life-threatening disease. And so it's always easier to prevent than cure. And so, it's much easier and more desirable to help you, the person with hypoglycemia now, rather than waiting until it becomes one of those even worse situations I just described.
Beautiful. I mean, you started off right there with the hypoglycemia. So let's dive there first. What is it exactly? I mean, yeah, can you go into and really lay it out for us?
Absolutely. Okay, so your body has a few different sources of fuel energy. We've talked a lot in other episodes about metabolism, mitochondria, and ATP, right? So mitochondria are the little factories inside every cell that you have, except for red blood cells, that create ATP. ATP is literal energy. It's where matter meets energy. It's what is called chi or prana in the Eastern systems, right? It's the literal energy that does everything. Makes you move, makes your make the neuron in your brain fire, makes your heart beat. Everything is dependent on this ATP. And so what's this ATP dependent on? Well, it has kind of a main system and it has a backup system. So its main system is to combine glucose and oxygen to create ATP. That's the simple version. It has backup systems, and we'll talk about those backup systems because they're super relevant to all of this. But that's like the primary way. And so hypoglycemia is where there is a lack of that sugar to create energy. That's simply what it is. And so therefore, one of the backup systems, at least one of the backup systems, has to go into effect, because otherwise you're going to run out of energy. And as I said, this is not just the energy to be your best self. This is the energy to breathe, have heartbeat. Like, you die without this energy. So your body won't let you die, as I said, except for under exceptional circumstances that are pretty rare. But it will absolutely let you get into a state on a very frequent basis where every cell of your body is not producing enough energy, and therefore every system in your body, whether it's respiratory system, cardiovascular system, nervous system, where every system in your body doesn't have enough energy. And depending on how you're composed genetically, that may be more likely to show up for you. One person, a problem with one area, another person, it might show up as a problem in a different area, although there are tendencies that are universal. But wherever it shows up, that's where you're going to tend to have problems. So hypoglycemia is not enough energy. Now, to dig into that a little bit more, it's ultimately least not enough energy. Now, to dig into that a little bit more, what it technically is the cells not getting enough glucose to do this primary method of energy creation, known as glycolysis. So it has to use this backup system. How we measure it, though, tends to be the sugar, the glucose in the blood, rather than in the cells. It's very, very difficult to measure it in the cells. So that's where sometimes there can be some confusion about tests, results, and all the rest of it. We'll get into that more later. I know, but I'm just foreshadowing it for anyone who is listening to this and go, I thought I had hypoglycemia, but I had tests and they said I didn't. So, okay, right. That can be where there is that disparity there, because you may have had enough in your blood, but maybe not enough was getting into your cells.
Okay, perfect. No, that's really good distinctions there. So then with all of that, what would you say is, are there more than one causes, or is there a main cause if someone is to have hypoglycemia?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So what causes that sugar in the blood and therefore the cells to get low in the first place? Well, the most obvious answer to that, of course, is that you haven't eaten it or haven't eaten enough carbohydrates, right? So all carbohydrates.
Specifically carbohydrates.
Carbohydrates break down into glucose. Now, other units of energy like proteins can be converted to glucose, but carbohydrates are glucose, just in bigger configurations. So it might be like a long chain of sugar molecules, but ultimately when it's all broken down, it's just a sugar molecule, which we call glucose or dextrose. And so often it's not good to take glucose or dextrose because it is all broken down and then your body has too much at once. That's the argument against using those things, although it's not always true. And athletes, for instance, often take glucose, and maybe it's a good idea for them, certainly in some situations. But that's why it's generally not recommended. It's why it's generally recommended to have more starches or fruits, depending on who you listen to, because their sugar molecules are bigger and it takes longer to break them down into those individual units of glucose, which means it doesn't all go into your blood all at once, which it could do if it's already broken down as much as possible. So yeah, carbohydrates. So if you're not consuming enough carbohydrates, then you're going to run out of carbohydrates, or you're going to get low on carbohydrates. So that's the obvious answer. And that's why, as I said, when I had that potential medical situation, when I asked them what to do, they said, eat carbohydrates frequently. That's the most simplistic way of looking at it, right? Which is not, obviously, simplistic doesn't mean wrong. It maybe is just incomplete. So technically, yes, if you do consume glucose some kind of carbohydrates, significant quantity, even if it's only a snack, in a meal 2 to 3 hours every day, and even in the middle of the night, as some people do, then your blood sugar will never get low, but you haven't necessarily got to the root of the issue, which is, I think, what you're asking me about. So what causes it beyond that? Because as I said, the reason why when I called up and said it's gone too low and they said, don't worry about it, is because they know if the blood sugar gets too high, the body may not automatically correct it and it may kill you. But if the blood sugar gets too low, your body will automatically correct it and it won't kill you. As I said, the vast majority of the time. So then we have to ask ourselves, okay, what is it that will correct it? And the answer to that is stress chemicals, specifically cortisol, adrenaline, and noradrenaline. There are others involved. We'll talk about it later, but these are like the basics. So when your blood sugar gets too low, your body panics. This is going on, unconsciously usually. You have no conscious awareness that your body panics and goes, emergency, emergency, up the cortisol, up the adrenaline. What does that do? It converts protein to sugar. Where's the protein come from? Your muscles, for instance. Most of you is muscle, right? Most of your organs are muscle. Obviously, your muscles are muscle. And it will also convert fat into energy through a process called beta oxidation. There's also ketosis. It starts to get a bit complicated, but basically, just to answer this first question, you go from not enough blood sugar to let's get all the backup things going. Some of it may be ketosis, and some of it may be burning fat, but a lot of it will still be let's release sugar from storage. So your body stores sugar in the muscles and in the liver, primarily in the form of glycogen, which it can then easily convert back to glucose. So let's get the sugar out of storage. Let's convert the glycogen back to glucose and put it in the blood. And let's also increase the sugar by converting other things to glucose. Let's just say it that way, simply. And so when it does that, now, if it does that in a totally proportional and appropriate way, then that's it. You have no issue. So let's say you want to be a 7, ideally, just picking a slightly random number, and you go down to a 5, not feeling so good anymore. If that stress response just brought you back to to a 7 and kept you there, great. But that isn't what tends to happen. What tends to happen is that is this a sensible centered reaction or is this an emergency reaction? It's an emergency reaction, right? And so for an emergency, it tends to be like, let's not get it to 7, let's get it to 9 or 10, right? Because who knows why he or she is suddenly so low on sugar, right? Maybe they're starving. Maybe they're, on the run from something. Let's give them everything we've got. That's the body's automated thinking behind it. Let's give her everything she's got because they might actually need it, right? Then what happens? If it goes up to 9 or 10 and then the body just gradually uses it up, then even that would be fine. But that's not what happens. Then your pancreas will tend to overproduce insulin because it also panics. Oh my God, why is the blood sugar suddenly so high? I need to get that down. So then you release a lot of insulin. You tend to release too much insulin because, again, the body seems to have this panic response. And then your blood sugar levels will go too low. Once they get too low, one of two things will happen. You will either crave carbohydrates, which is very, very common, and get them, or you could probably guess what the other option is, Chrissy.
Your body's going to release some more adrenaline to kickstart the whole process all over again.
Exactly. And so preventing all the negative aspects of that cycle that I just talked about is what is meant when we say keep our blood sugar balanced. And so hypoglycemia is the end of that roller coaster where our blood sugar is imbalanced in the low end, because that tends to be more noticeable. We'll talk about the other issues later, which get more severe. But generally, it will not get too high until you get to a more severe stage. But it will get low enough for you to really not feel good before it gets to a severe stage. So that's why hypoglycemia is what we'll tend to focus on. Our blood sugar feels low. At least some organ systems, glands of the body are not getting enough ATP, not enough energy, because there's not enough energy to go around, and they will be functioning suboptimally.
And so then going within that, I mean, it's really talking about, giving the body the fuel that it needs to keep that blood sugar at a good level. So we're not dipping too far down. Is there any other thing that would potentially cause our blood sugar to get so low other than just not having enough fuel in our systems?
Yeah. So stress can also do it for the same mechanism we talked about. Having insulin being generally too high in the body will absolutely do that, or can absolutely do that. Again, it'll tend to be in cycles, up and down. That tends to relate more to insulin resistance. But even before we get to that, there is some variation that is natural with all of the hormones. So insulin's a hormone, right? Some people tend to have higher testosterone than others. Some people tend to have higher estrogen than others. But it actually goes down to some of the more functional hormones as well. Some people tend to have higher thyroid hormone than others. Some people tend to have higher insulin than others. Some people tend to have higher cortisol than others. And we actually, have reports on this on Genetic Insights where we talk about what your tendencies are for most of what I just said, if not all. I'm not 100% sure off the top of my head, but we cover most of it. Certainly, I know we cover insulin. And so when your body has... In fact, let's get into talking about what insulin actually is. Let's get into the nitty gritty because it's super, super, super important to understand that. As I said, with that long explanation, although like lack of carbs or excessive carbs in the bloodstream was kind of part of the problem, as you saw, none of that would be a problem if it weren't for the excess insulin. Until a person is seriously ill and then they get too high blood sugar. But up until that point, the only real issue is insulin, right? So let's talk about insulin. So let's understand what it does, right? A little bit of science bit. So first of all, it's an anabolic hormone. It's one of the primary anabolic hormones. For that reason, it's actually abused sometimes by bodybuilders. So they don't just take testosterone and growth hormone, they actually take insulin, some of them. So what does anabolic mean? It means to build up rather than to break down. Now, its tendency to be that is exactly why a lot of people do not like it, and we'll get into that. So what does it do? It helps you take up glucose into your cells, as I said. Now, I phrased it that way on purpose. It actually isn't essential to do that in every case. This is something interesting that I only fairly recently discovered, and I read a book and someone claimed this, and I was like, I don't know about this. They weren't giving references. So I just Googled it. And it's very interesting. Like half of the Google results were saying, you must have insulin to take sugar into your cells. The other half were saying, oh, here are cases where you don't. So one case where you don't is your brain and your liver. Both of those can take in sugar without insulin, according to the first page of Google, mainstream results, let alone someone's alternative opinion. Another reason that I saw is as a result of exercise. So if your muscles become depleted in sugar, that glycogen storage that I just said, as a result of exercise, they can, at least in circumstances, reabsorb the sugar that they need without insulin being present. But anyway, generally, insulin is certainly very helpful for that, if not essential in every way. It also oxidizes the glucose. So that is that process that I talked about eventually creating ATP. That glucose and oxygen together is the crucial thing, but insulin is involved in that process, not just getting into the cells, but also that combination. It's also responsible for making the type of glucose which gets stored, which is called glycogen. It can be done without it, but certainly more insulin will be more glycogen synthesis. The other thing is that it increases amino acid uptake into the muscle. So when we think about insulin, we tend to think only of sugar, but actually certain amino acids, leucine is definitely one of them from the branched chain amino acids, arginine is another one, and I think the other branched chain amino acids, I'm not sure. There's a few amino acids, not all of them. This is why when you have a normal meal that's high in protein, but with no carbohydrates, you can, not saying it will happen, but you can actually end up with even lower blood sugar. And that's exactly what happened to me. That time when my blood sugar got so low, it was below the level, is because I actually tried a keto meal. And that stimulated a lot of insulin, because that seems to be what my body does. And then there was no sugar. Well, there wasn't much sugar for it to take up from the meal, right? So it just pushed even more sugar into the cells. My blood sugar got even lower. So that absolutely can happen. That I saw that happening a few years ago. I didn't understand why. Now I understand why. It's this. But anyway, that's one of the reasons why the bodybuilders use it, because it's helping to push more and more protein into the muscles, right? And then there's lipid synthesis as well. So this is when there's a very large amount of glucose all at once, especially, your body will actually make fats out of the glucose to store them, right? Not just glycogen. Obviously, the better form of storage from most people's point of view is just have it ready and waiting as lovely sugar fuel. But more problematic is that it's ready and waiting, but not in a super great form, which we call fat, being overweight. So that's the other option. So insulin does all of that. So helps your body store sugar as fat. That's probably the one that no one likes. That's one of the reasons why people seek to reduce insulin. But the other reason, so these are all the excitatory reasons. So these are the things that it does, increases. But let's look at the things it reduces, because this is also the issue. So it reduces lipolysis, which is the breakdown of fat in your fat tissue. So not only does it take the carbohydrate and store it as fat, the higher your insulin is, the less of it will be broken down from fat back into fuel. So that's an issue. It reduces proteolysis, which is the breakdown of protein into amino acids for fuel. So again, a reason why bodybuilder types would like it. It stops the body going, oh, well, maybe I'll just take a bit of that muscle protein to make glucose. It reduces that having insulin. It's also responsible for glycogenolysis, which is the breakdown of glycogen. So when you have insulin, it does cause not only glycogen to be formed, but also for it to be pulled out of the muscles and storage, depending on the situation. And it causes glucose to be made from other things. So from amino acids, we talked about, for also glycerol, lactate, which is a part of that Krebs cycle and makes ATP. It's insulin also inhibits ketogenesis, right? Yeah, sorry, I was getting, I don't know if I said that correctly. So it reduces those process. It reduces that process, right? The synthesis of glucose from amino acids, which is why, again, you would want that if you didn't want your muscles being reduced. It reduces ketoneogenesis, so it will reduce the amount that fat is broken down into ketones for you to use as fuel. So it's like pro using sugar as fuel, anti using anything else as fuel. That's kind of the simple way of what I've just been saying the last 5 minutes. And so, yeah, last thing, if your insulin is not that high, it puts a brake on, breaking down fat and protein. If it's there in large amounts, it's more involved in putting glucose into the cells. So obviously you want the right amount when you have sugar, but the point is if it doesn't go down enough afterwards, the level of insulin, then it could be not transporting sugar into your cells, but blocking your body from doing any of the catabolic processes, which might break down muscle, which you don't want, but also stopping the breakdown of fat, which most people probably do want. So those are all the things that insulin does. Hopefully we really understand it now that we're watching. It's not just for getting sugar into your cells. But the reason I went through all that is just to explain that is why insulin causes hypoglycemia in excess, and why having an excess of insulin is also generally not considered desirable, because it prevents that breakdown of fat breakdown of fat out of our body, a breakdown of fat into fuel that many of us would also consider to be desirable. So generally, the mainstream version of not having hypoglycemia, as I shared kind of near the beginning, is just eat carbs very frequently, right, to stop it ever getting that low. But the more first line alternative view of how to deal with hypoglycemia is to get insulin under control, to stop it being so high so that your sugar doesn't go so low, and so that then your body's able to break down more fat as fuel, which most people want because they'd like to lose fat. There is a third level, the alternative, but I'll probably, unless I change my mind as a result of your questions, I'll probably get to explaining that more of insulin resistance, the next step that we go to, because it's more relevant to there. It's not super relevant to hypoglycemia.
Great. I mean, I've just got questions swirling away in this space, but yeah, and it might not be pertinent in this section. It might be that we add it later, but it's like the things of where it's like back, especially where it's like eat small meals. Then it's like, no, wait, don't. Now you've got to fast and like wait hours in between. And then all these other things. And then just like, oh my gosh, what's right? And then it's like, yeah, sure, we can do a little pinprick and find out where our blood glucose is, but it's not really telling us like, how can we ever find out really where our insulin level is? So it's just like the swirl of this balance, and this body is so intelligent, but yet it feels like one thing could be out of kilter that could like knock something else off. So
well, so let me explain. I can at least, before we get into the third explanation, get into explaining those two you just said. So the thinking behind having sugar every few hours is extremely simple. I've already kind of explained it, right? Just keep having it, it won't get low. But the thinking behind the other thing that you said, which is becoming super, super popular these days, at least in our kind of world, is low carb and intermittent fasting, right? Oh, and exercise. Now, low carb, intermittent fasting, exercise. All of these have value, and I would say all of them are used as a strategy, especially for insulin resistance, more than they're used as a strategy for hypoglycemia. That's not exclusive. I've noticed some people whose main issue is hypoglycemia certainly getting into intermittent fasting and stuff like that, because they kind of get this idea, oh, everything's the opposite of what I thought. It's not that I need carbs every 3 hours. It's like I never need carbs. And so there are plenty of people into that. But generally, it's more when they really decide they have insulin resistance that people really embrace that. So let's just explain that. So the idea behind this alternative version is also pretty simple and easy to understand. And it's this. They say the problem is insulin. For all the reasons I said before, right? Even with the blood sugar high, everything's fine, so long as the insulin doesn't overreact and reduce the blood sugar too much, which is what we call hypoglycemia. So if the problem is insulin, how can we reduce insulin? Well, one thing we can do is we can reduce our carbohydrates, because body mainly produces insulin in response to carbohydrates, right? Pretty obvious. That's the ketogenic approach. It's not all there is to it, but it's the basics of it when it comes to blood sugar. And so, even with protein, the true ketogenic people who are seriously keto, they even say to have low protein as well, right? Or medium protein at most. They say that too much protein will take you out of ketosis. And it's certainly true in the sense that too much protein will still stimulate insulin, which will take you out of ketosis to various degrees. So that's why they're like high fat, medium to low protein, extremely low carb. That's the true keto that a lot of people aspire to, but maybe not that many people actually do. But that's the theory behind it. So does that make sense? Don't take anything that stimulates insulin. Right, that's number one. Number two is let's go with the fasting. So with the fasting, the idea of this is your body creates insulin in response to when you eat anything other than, very high fat, ketogenic diet. So one way you can reduce the amount of insulin is to eat a high fat ketogenic diet. An even better way to reduce insulin is not eat anything. That's the thinking behind it. If someone is a real proponent of this and they think I've oversimplified it or missed something, please add it in the comments, but I'm not doing this on purpose. I don't think I have. I think that is it in a nutshell. Now, here's the thing. Does that work? And the answer is sometimes. Yes, absolutely. Right? And so the differentiator to me seems to be, and wait, before I get into the differentiator, did I explain the mechanism about why? So don't have carbohydrate, don't have it don't have it some of the time. Yeah, I guess that's it. Okay. So the differentiator is whether or not a person has a tendency to just spike their adrenal chemicals, let's say a proportional appropriate amount, when their blood sugar starts to get low, or whether they have their tendency to really spark their stress chemicals when the blood sugar has a tendency to get low. This, to me, is the crucial distinction. Everyone's stress chemicals will go high. That's what's required for that process of breaking down protein and using fats as fuel. And it's what's required for pulling the glycogen out of storage into glucose into the blood. But just as some people might overproduce insulin, which causes a compensating effect, leaving the blood sugar to be too low, some people overproduce adrenaline, noradrenaline, and or cortisol. And it's those people who have a response like I had. If you go ketogenic, if you intermittent fast, if you don't get, I guess that's it. I mean, if you don't eat, if you wait too long without eating, then you're going to have your blood sugar get low. But rather than just a bit of a boost of stress to get you back to where you're meant to be, you're going to do a lift off of stress, which is going to overcompensate. Your body's having to overproduce insulin. So to me, that's the simple answer, Chrissy. I hope that makes sense. Why is intermittent fasting and ketogenic diet great for some people and not great for others? I also noticed, just like with body type wise, the body type that seems to do better with the intermittent fasting ketogenic diet I've seen overall, even though I know there are many exceptions, is like the bigger body type, right? And so that bigger body type, from what I've seen, they produce more stress chemicals than an optimal body type, but they do not produce as many stress chemicals as like that skinny underweight body type. So the people with the most stress chemical activity tend to be the underweight, malnourished looking ones, I would say. The ones with medium is the overweight people, and the ones with the lowest are the ones who are really optimal, not a lot of fat and an appropriate amount of muscle as well for their body type. So now, again, that's just oversimplification. I'm sure there are many exceptions, but certainly if you relate to that, you're like the thin, wiry, jittery kind of type, that archetype, then you might well be that kind of person. And this is kind of, what's the word, apocryphal, like people really kind of sense that, right? If they see someone who's all skinny and worn away, they might, keto might not be right for you. So that's something that we kind of, and similarly, if we see someone who's holding onto quite a bit of extra fat, we might recommend it. But of course, that isn't necessarily going to be true, right? And so there may be people who are very substantially overweight, but who feel awful, terrible with ketogenic or intermittent fasting. There could be other reasons why that could be an issue, like the amount of toxicity that's being released as a result of the lipolysis, the breakdown of fat, because a lot of toxins are stored in the fat cells. But it could also be this issue.
Yeah, it's that thing of having tried both at different times of my life, and then trying to figure out, okay, what's worked or what is working or what isn't working. It's like trying to, because you're just kind of going in a little bit blind. It's like,
yep.
Is there any other way to figure out what's right for a certain person?
Yeah, well, first of all, I personally wouldn't recommend either of those as a default. Either of those strategies. I'll talk about the third strategy probably later with the insulin resistance, the one that I think really works. Or maybe we'll do it here. I'm not trying to withhold anything, wherever it makes sense. But in some cases, I would say that each of those strategies could be appropriate for someone. So yeah, how can you tell which is you? Yeah, I mean, trying it is one of the obvious things, but there's a downside to both of those. So I'll tell you what they are. So there's a downside to the first one of just continually having lots of sugar very frequently, as well as, most people who do that approach, because it's a more mainstream approach, they eat a more mainstream diet full of polyunsaturated fatty acids and all kinds of other things that maybe are not optimal. And so that person, they have more of a chance of developing the worst problems, the insulin resistance and the type 2 diabetes. So ironically, and some people get conspiratorial about this, if you follow the mainstream advice, you're more likely to get a mainstream disease. Now, with the ketogenic, it's the exact opposite advice in a way. It's like never carbs instead of very frequently carbs. The downside is, for me, of that, if a person can handle it, if they don't overproduce that stress chemicals and it doesn't send them into a real spiral, if they feel nice and balanced in it, as many people do, the only downside to it is that you're not really resolving the issue of your body overproducing insulin as a response to carbohydrate. You are avoiding it and ignoring it. Now, I know some people who are really into this, like, I don't care, I'm going to avoid it for the rest of my life. I'm just eating steak or whatever. And if that's true, like, I've met these people. If it's true, which it is for them, and some of them actually do well in it, then great, right? If you want to go no carb rest of your life and just avoid the problem, sometimes you can just avoid problems until we die, and then who cares? But the problem is avoided and not resolved, generally. Now, you could say, well, Elwin, and I've seen this keto people saying this sometimes, not that often. No, that's not true, Elwin, because if you just give your body a break, like a year without carbs or whatever, then it will deal with them better once you start introducing them again. That is not my experience. That is not the feedback that I've seen from people who've tried it. What I see is the opposite. What I see is a lot of people are like, as soon as I have carbs again, even a little bit, I see so many of these comments and hear so many of these comments, I just had a little bit of this and oh God, I felt terrible. That's really common. And so that tells me we're not resolving the issue. We are avoiding the issue, which again, avoiding the issue is better than suffering from the issue. But if it's possible to actually resolve it, that would be even better.
Beautiful. Thank you for that digression and going deeper into insulin, because it's very good education, so we can kind of know, what the balance is within the space of it, because there's a lot going on under the hood, let's just say. So thank you for that. Because going back into hypoglycemia, as we were discussing and moving further into that topic, are there things that we should be aware of for it, or like the signs and symptoms, or things that we should be cautious within this, within having hypoglycemia?
Yeah, and for this, I'm happy to just give like the mainstream list, So I mentioned a couple of them earlier, like dizziness, shakiness, tiredness, lack of clarity in thinking, sweating is another interesting one, feeling hungry, but especially like a craving more than a grumbling in the belly kind of thing, more of a rather than a it's not a very good description. Tingling sometimes, especially tingling lips. Sorry. Definitely a fast heartbeat. That really goes hand in hand with the adrenaline, but that's something that's often noticeable to people, and the fact you notice it, which is called palpitations, and then it's some kind of extreme emotion is the most telltale sign of it that I see that is disproportional to the situation. And which extreme emotion, it actually varies totally on the person. Some people get irritated or maybe even furious. Some people get tearful, or maybe even full of despair. Some people get anxious, or maybe even panicked. Some people, may just be a little generally moody, some kind of combination. Why? Because all of these things in different ways, as we talked about before, stimulate stress chemicals. And for many people, they're the consequence of stress chemicals. It goes both ways. So meaning a lot of what an emotion is like a response to what's going on in your body, right? So, suddenly you feel more tense and you feel more, your heart rate is elevated and you feel hotter. A lot of people just feel angry with that, right? That's just part of the situation. So, turning pale is another like classic one that I would consider to be a little bit further along. Like actual weakness. So you might feel weak if it's mild, but if it's gone on for a while, you might actually be weak. Oh my God, I can barely lift it up. This thing that's normally easy, something like that. Oh yeah, like blurriness with the eyes is absolutely something that you get as well. Confusion. So this is where the brain is actually starting to get low on sugar. And so some people's brains use more fuel than others, I would say. So it's not necessarily related to intelligence. It's more related to overthinking. So if you're someone who constantly thinks a lot and thinks very intensely, you're definitely your brain is going to be using up more fuel than if you're more relaxed, more present, more even, drifting off into daydreaming on a regular basis. That is less fuel intensive. So it's like how much you are thinking. If you're the type of person who thinks a lot and thinks intensely, then you're more likely to have this confusion, not able to focus kind of thing show up. What else? Anything? Oh, yeah. Sleepiness. And this might actually be falling asleep. I remember I used to have this back in the day before I started doing this, 15 years ago, something like that. I would be at work and I used to have a really busy job at a really busy restaurant, which kept my stress chemicals constantly high because it's like, every 2 minutes or something, there's a new order that you have to fulfill. So it's always like, next thing, shouting, screaming. And then I went to this job in a retirement home where most of the day I was just left to my own devices and didn't have that much to do. And so I used that time fairly well. I spent a lot of time studying and reading and listening and learning. But I remember a lot of time I'd be sitting there and just like actually falling asleep, and I know this happens to people even when they're driving quite frequently. It can be a dangerous thing. Luckily, I don't drive, so I didn't risk anyone's life doing it. I suppose I risked my life. I mean, the amount of times that I fell asleep on a bus in a, dangerous area or, just on a seat outside in a dangerous area, it wasn't great. So yeah, can be life-threatening if you're operating heavy machinery. Otherwise, probably more just inconvenient. Could get you fired if you're falling asleep at work.
That's not a great thing.
So that's serious, running out of energy compared to the other stuff I've said. But it's still often anything terrible. And then, beyond that, we're talking about going into a coma and seizures, all kinds of, really serious stuff.
Are there any other like conditions that somebody may have that like hypoglycemia is a product of it, or it goes hand in hand, or anything like that?
That's a good question. And I have to say, until I really dug into understanding this thoroughly, I was not equipped to answer it. But the thing that I understand now is any condition that results from excessive stress correlates with hypoglycemia. And almost every condition correlates with high levels of excessive chronic, at least, stress, right? From cardiovascular health to issues detoxifying, tissue calcification, hormonal imbalances, any issues with the immune system, including the C words, which are all related to the immune system not functioning as well as possible. Immune system's down-rated by stress. Obviously being overweight, thyroid hormone. I mean, it would be definitely quicker to compile a list of things that are not correlated with hypoglycemia, and that list probably would basically consist of the very few diseases that are innate and not caused by the environmental circumstance. That there are some things that we're just born with and stuck with, and there's nothing we can do about it, that aren't caused by being poisoned, like many things are, that aren't caused by being low in some nutrients, as many things are, that aren't caused by being imbalanced, as many things are, that are, fundamentally, no matter what you do, those diseases aren't correlated with hypoglycemia. Pretty much everything else is. The ones that are more direct, I guess, are the ones that are more directly attributed to stress, like what they call the functional diseases: chronic pain, gastrointestinal symptoms, allergies, and intolerances. Those would be like the categories that are the most easily correlated. But and I'd also say mental health issues of all kinds. Depression absolutely could just be related to low blood sugar. Not always, of course. There are many other factors, including ones I've talked about, but it's significant. Even the more serious mental diseases. I have seen evidence, not conclusive, but evidence that just balancing blood sugar will prevent violent crime in many situations. When your blood sugar is balanced, you're absolutely in a better mood. I remember there was a study about the sentences given by judges who are giving out sentences all day. They were way harsher before lunch than after lunch. So by the way, if you're ever in a court and you're waiting sentencing from a judge, do whatever is necessary to get that bad boy after lunch. It can literally make, you have
Take
to spend
years off the sentence.
Yeah, it's absolutely huge. So if it can make that big a difference in I use that as an example of judgments and decision making, right?
Yeah.
So far we talked about health issues, but are you involved in road rage? Do you act impulsively? Do you act compulsively? Do you do rash and reckless behavior? Do you act without thinking? Like, all of these things are classic hallmarks of hypoglycemia as well, to me. Although often there are other factors involved. But hypoglycemia is key in the sense that study after study does show that if you remove the hypoglycemia, it gets a hell of a lot easier. So if you have really bad depression, it may not cure it, but it won't be nearly as bad, because the worst parts will be when the blood sugar is low. That's when you'll feel your worst. So if your blood sugar no longer gets low, you won't ever feel as bad as you used to feel, even if you haven't resolved the underlying problem.
Great. I mean, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. There's so many, that specifically, there's that term out there, hangry. Somebody's so hungry that they're so angry. So absolutely impacts the mood and how you're feeling, and the choices that you're going to make with those within that situation. Which then,
yes.
Yeah.
So let me add to that, because I think I've kind of assumed something there without fully explicating it, which is this. What I'm suggesting with this is that the majority of the time that you get stressed, it's because of low blood sugar. Yes, there are other reasons to get stressed. We did a whole episode on this. I think to broadly categorize it, there's two reasons why you get stressed. On a everyday basis. Obviously, there's extreme reasons. There's real traumas. There's real assaults and all the rest of it. But on an everyday basis, most people are not constantly getting assaulted throughout the day, and yet they are constantly feeling stressed throughout the day. So what is it? It's usually either a neurochemical habit or it's based on a biochemical reality. So what do I mean by that? Neurochemical habit is all the world of psychiatrists, psychologists, NLP practitioners, personal development gurus, even meditation, yoga, power of the mind. All of that stuff is like, your life can change if you think differently. That's the essence of it. And this is true in the sense that, let's say if you have a tendency to get angry or you have a tendency to get anxious, that the neurons that fire together wire together, meaning you dig a neuronal pathway in your brain that's kind of like a ditch that then the next time a situation comes up, you'll go down that path again because there's a big groove there, and it feels much more difficult and unnatural to go down a new path. So if someone criticizes you, the effortless path is to go into defending yourself. The very untrod path is to go into appreciating them for trying to help, for instance, right? Even though you, in theory, might think that's a good idea, especially because it's someone who you like, maybe they're vulnerable, whatever, you kind of just get irritated and defensive automatically because that's your neuronal path you use to trading, right? So that's one way of looking at it. But the other way is the biochemical reality. And you and I have discussed this before, I know, Chrissy, maybe even years ago. And the more I dig into it, the more I am convinced, and this is through real experience for myself now, not just theory, that the vast majority of it actually is just a biochemical reality. Meaning, something triggers stress chemicals. This lack of blood sugar is huge. Could also be other things, though. Could be being poisoned, which we're constantly exposed to excessive levels of poison in this day and age. Could be due to, a deficiency of, say, something like a magnesium or B vitamins are common. So there could be various things, all of which I've talked about before. But just lack of fuel, I think, is just so ubiquitous in our day and age because we demand so much of ourselves compared to before, and we have so much stimulation available to us than ever before. If you think, like, if I were to like transport us now, Chrissy, teleport us into 500 years ago, I think the thing that would affect us initially would be probably the horror of it, like the casual violence, the lack of law and order, the smells, the lack of hygiene, all of that kind of stuff. But I think after like 10 years, the main thing that we would notice that's different once we got used to all of that stuff, because it doesn't take that long to get used to a different environment, is the boredom. Just the lack of stimulation. Like hearing any music would be a rare treat. You would go out of your way to be able to do it. Hearing a story would be rare. Seeing anyone you haven't seen before in any form, right? I'm not even talking about real life, book, screen, none of it, right? But, oh my God, a new person, how exciting. The level of stimulation that we have access to these days is significant. And so I do think that makes a difference as well. It makes that stress response easier to trigger. But I think blood sugar is huge. I think that when our blood sugar is stable, we handle all that stuff okay, because we do. Generally, most of us are functional most of the time. And it's only when the blood sugar gets low or when the stress gets too high, that's when we tend to actually have a problem. We're either having a meltdown or, whatever. We're not functioning anymore to the level that we want to.
We're going to take a quick break to share with you one of our amazing sponsors, Genetic Insights. What makes Genetic Insights uniquely valuable is that they test over 83 million different variants, which guarantees a 99.7% accuracy on all of their DNA reports. With over 100 reports available, you get comprehensive insights into what your DNA is telling you about how to optimize your health today and in the future. I found reviewing my results to be incredibly accurate and applying some of the recommendations, which are personalized to your individual DNA, to be extremely helpful for me and my family. I also loved how easy it was to upload my raw DNA data that I already had from previously using Ancestry.com, because Genetic Insights supports uploading raw data from all major platforms. To get your health reports, go to geneticinsights.co and get 20% off today by using coupon code Rejuvenate. Remember that supporting our sponsors supports our podcast, which allows us to keep sharing this important information with you free of cost. So, go get your Genetic Insights health reports by going to geneticinsights.co and use coupon code Rejuvenate for 20% off today. Really, really good, important point. My next question on the list, but you pretty much answered it before when we were going into that deep dive in insulin, really was talking about intermittent fasting. But then the question is it helping or hindering? And I think I pretty much know your answer, but if you'd like to just bring it home.
Intermittent fasting is helping if your stress chemicals do not have a tendency to be excessive. And how would you know that? I would say a good indicator of that is how you feel. However, got to be careful with this one. Okay. So if you intermittent fast and you feel weak and shaky or terrible, all the stuff we've talked about, all those kind of symptoms of hypoglycemia, then I would say it's a safe bet that your body probably is overproducing stress chemicals. Although I have to say, if it's constant, then it might be, partly down to just having a high insulin, like the intermittent fasting advocates say. But especially if it's periodic, if it's cyclic, I would definitely put it down to stress chemicals more. The other thing that can make you feel not great, though, when you're intermittent fasting is that your body is going into lipolysis. It is starting to break down fat, and that can release toxins into your system. So, yeah, we can't be sure that that's what it is. So if you feel bad, it's probably not good for you. It's probably not going to work for you long term. You're going to inevitably be tempted to break it, basically. If you feel great, it might be good for you, but you have to assess why you're feeling great. Because what I've observed is that a lot of people intermittent fast, they say, I have so much energy. What they mean is that they have so much stress. Other than dopamine, stress is energy from a experiential point of view. I mean, ATP is energy from a literal point of view, but what makes you feel energy? Well, excitation itself is glutamate, but energy is really more either adrenaline and noradrenaline, or it's dopamine. So energy is either, I want to get away from this, which is noradrenaline and adrenaline. Maybe I want to fight this. And I just use the word want, but it's more about need. I need to get away from this. I need to destroy this. Stop this, right? Whereas dopamine, which is the other form of feeling energy, is more desire. I want to do this. I would love to do this. It would be fun to do this. I would enjoy doing this. I'm enthusiastic about doing this. That's dopamine. And they're all stress chemicals, but the ones that are more problematic are the ones other than dopamine. It's very, very hard to have too much dopamine. Very, very easy to have too much of the other ones. So when a person says they feel great, we want to check and make sure it's not excessive amounts of cortisol, adrenaline, and noradrenaline. How would we know that? The key is how you feel after you first eat again. If after you first eat, you feel better, so you felt great fasting, you feel better not fasting, then you're probably actually healthy and just enjoying a fast, because there are lots of benefits of fasting. But if you feel worse after eating, there could be a few reasons for that, of course. One of the reasons could be that what you're eating is disagreeing with you, or the way you're eating is disagreeing with you. But what it also says to me is that when you eat, your stress chemicals go down. So you're flying high, probably on adrenaline. That's what I suspect. And then you eat, your body goes into less of a stress state, and you're like, oh, I feel so tired now. I feel so demotivated. I feel so down. But it's just that you're not running high on excessive stress. So that's the main way that I would tell. You can also do that, more scientifically, like by measuring pulse, for instance, before and after eating. If anything, your pulse should go up after eating because you're just giving your body energy. So, if you're just giving your body energy, why would the pulse go down? Right? But yeah, so it can do. So yeah, that would be how I would test.
I like the measuring of the pulse thing. I'm going to try that little experiment. I was going to ask if hypoglycemia is left.
Oh, and sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, probably better than the pulse is core temperature. So
Okay.
you put a thermostat under your arm an hour before you eat, say, while you're, sitting down, and then you do it again, maybe half an hour after you eat, and that's more reliable than the pulse because the pulse can vary for different reasons. But when you eat, your core temperature should go up. But your core temperature will go up temporarily as a result of stress chemicals, not just giving yourself enough fuel. So if your core temperature goes down after eating, that's a really great sign that you must have been running on a lot of stress.
Good distinctions there. Thank you. So then, going into, if hypoglycemia is left untreated, then, what can happen? Like, what's the knock-on effect for our bodies? I mean, here on our podcast, we're really talking about optimization, anti-aging, things like that. So what really happens to our physical body if that just it carries on and on and on?
It's a good question. Well, I guess the counter question is, what happens if our stress chemicals like cortisol stay chronically high? And what happens if insulin starts to get excessively high, chronically high, which is what is often called insulin resistance, which or attributed to insulin resistance, which we'll talk about probably in the second part. Yeah, and I think I'm going to be able to cover both in one episode. So yeah, you could end up with insulin resistance and worse. I guess that's the simple answer, and we'll talk more about what that is and what's involved in it. But the other thing is really, I would say the more pressing thing, let's say before that ever happens even, that could be really still a problem and serious, is what happens as a result of elevated stress chemicals. One thing that, for instance, is high blood pressure. And high blood pressure absolutely is the number one indicator of heart disease and cardiovascular disease, which is the number one or number two killer. The other number one or number two killer, the C word, is related to immune system function more than anything. And immune system function is heavily influenced by how much stress you have in your system. And secondarily also, excess insulin doesn't help it either. So even if it doesn't progress to the other more serious issues, is it accelerating your aging? Absolutely. Is it making any condition that you have worse? Absolutely. And even irrespective of the impact the stress chemicals have, what's the impact? Let's say you don't believe in gluconeogenesis, you have your own theory. Even then, what's the impact on your every organ and system in your body frequently not having enough fuel, not having enough ATP, not having enough mitochondrial energy? Or maybe not having enough. I'm not talking about necessarily a medically low amount, but I'm saying not an optimal amount. If your brain doesn't have an optimal amount of energy, if your liver doesn't have an optimal amount of energy, if your thymus doesn't have an optimal amount of energy, if your thyroid doesn't have an optimal amount of energy all the time, what's the impact of that? Probably not ideal, right? And so that's why there is this correlation, I would say, to stress being bad for every area of the body. So in terms of what am I able to prove to you with study after study that hypoglycemia is bad for every organ in the body? No. But I can prove to you that stress is, and I can prove to you that stress is intimately related with hypoglycemia.
We discussed hormones within insulin. Are there any other roles that hormones are playing with, or as with this condition of hypoglycemia?
Yeah, absolutely. So we discussed cortisol and the adrenalines. Obviously, they're an essential part of it in the vast majority of cases. Low thyroid is also a big one, and potentially high thyroid as well. So high thyroid, certainly, because then when your metabolism is actually fast, then it has a greater demand for glucose. And so if you're not able to meet that demand, then you're more likely to end up in a hypoglycemic state. So if that's the case, why would low thyroid also be a problem? For kind of the same reason, but opposite, right? So if you have low thyroid hormone, that's another reason why, bottom line, your systems are not getting enough ATP. And what do we know your body does when your systems do not get enough ATP? They use adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol to force more glucose to be available so that your mitochondria can make more ATP. So either directly or indirectly, thyroid has a huge impact. And I've talked about thyroid in detail before, so I won't talk about it anymore. Excess estrogen and prolactin are also correlated with this issue. They tend to be correlated with a excess of the stress chemicals we don't want too much of, cortisol and noradrenaline, and then definitely in the case of prolactin, a lack of the stress chemical we do want more of, which is dopamine. So as we talked about, you have to be motivated by something. So if your dopamine is low and you're not, not getting off the couch, then you must be getting off the couch because of stress. If it's not because you want to do something, it's because you have to do something. So that's the stress feeling. And so, yeah, prolactin doesn't help you. Prolactin gets in the way of you feeling motivated. Estrogen is just very tied into the stress hormones, specifically cortisol. Their rising tends to correlate together for complex reasons we'll probably talk about in another episode. And related to that, so low levels of progesterone and low levels of testosterone also correlate to hypoglycemia. They also correlate to increased insulin sensitivity, but I'd say the most important thing is that the higher your progesterone and or testosterone tends to be, the lower your stress chemicals tend to be. So let's look at it this way. If you're eating optimally, you might still have hypoglycemia if you have this tendency to get stressed, right? Because then as soon, you've eaten perfectly reasonably, but as soon as your blood sugar is low, your body overproduces sugar, your body then overproduces insulin, and you're back in this bad position, right? And so we can really stop that process in its tracks if that's the problem with optimal levels of progesterone and testosterone. If you're not eating well, which we'll get to define, I guess we'll have to do it this episode actually. Can't leave people hanging. But if you're not eating well, then even optimal levels of progesterone and testosterone won't save you. But if you are, and the thing that's messing you up is stress, then they can be really, really helpful. And related to that, it's not a hormone, but I'll throw it in, is serotonin. We've done a whole episode of this before. I won't get into it. The mainstream understanding of serotonin is changing rapidly now to actually follow along with what I taught and will continue to teach. But certainly excess serotonin, as excess anything by definition, is not good. And excess serotonin definitely correlates with excess levels of stress chemicals and reduced insulin sensitivity as well, which is more likely to start that up and down roller coaster with the blood sugar.
And then thank you for that, going into those hormones there. Then my question would be then, obviously there's genetic components, genetic factors, the SNPs, things like that. So how can somebody tie all that in? What could be some conditions genetically that people would either need to look out for? How could they look out for to see if that's going to be a factor pertaining to blood sugar hypoglycemia?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so the simple answer is Genetic Insights. We have a blood sugar collection. I'm not here to necessarily sell that. I know a lot of people watching this might have already bought that, and that's why they're watching this video. But yeah, check out the reports available to you in there. right? And there will be reports on your tendency to hypoglycemia, just fundamentally, and all the other peripheral stuff we talked about. The tendency towards your fasting insulin being high, a tendency to HbA1c, which is how high is your blood sugar being overall, cortisol, testosterone, all the things that we've talked about, even the tendency to increase stress. We'll talk about that in there as well. So all of those can be a clue as to what's going on, right? Like if you see, especially when you notice patterns, you're like, wow, I have a really high tendency to be stressed, according to this report. Oh, and I have a tendency to high cortisol, according to this report. Oh, and I have a tendency to hypoglycemia, according to this report. Then we can start to put it together and go, these things might be related and this might be the most important aspect for me. So it's not a guarantee, it's not a diagnostic tool, it's giving you a risk score and an indication, but it's a very, very helpful starting place to go, this looks like it might be it. Let me try, either acting as if that's the issue, if the answer is simple, like changing diet or something, or testing for it if it involves, medication and stuff.
And it could also be as well, let's say somebody is doing all the right things, but something isn't working. Would it then be like, okay, hey, let's look at the genetics. Maybe there's something that's being missed.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't always have the answers, but the amount of times I found some obscure thing that I haven't thought of for just that reason, like you said, Chrissy. Obviously, I've thought about it at some point, but I mean, it's hard to hold 50 different variables for 50 different conditions in your head at all time for anyone, I would think. And so it's fantastic to just have that. And often it can just be one little thing that when you look at it, it actually reveals everything. Yeah, that's happened to me over and over again. So good point.
Let's say, okay, somebody's been watching or they've had it, something that's brought them here to us today. Let's say they suspect they have hypoglycemia. What's going to be their next step? Is it going to be a test? Is it going to be something? Because you gave us the signs and symptoms. Great. But how do they really figure this out if this is something that they have?
Yeah, it's a good question. So because the recommendations are pretty harmless, one thing is just to act as if you do, even though you don't know. Try the recommendations, see if you feel better. That's a simple answer. So, and I guess we'll get into recommendations next, but that's one thing. Just assume you have it. And I'll give recommendations, but as I said, there are two other sets of recommendations out there, which you also may want to try. You may want to try the mainstream of having some carbs every 2 to 3 hours with, protein and fat. And you may want to try the alternative intermittent fasting ketogenic diet approach. If either of those work for you, great, right? And I'll explain why each of those might work, and I'll explain some of the downsides. But that's your choice. And sometimes we just want to feel better in the moment. So by all means. Other than that, of course, we can test. So testing your blood sugar is actually the easiest blood test to do in the universe because blood sugar issues are so uncommon, and you don't even have to send it off to a lab. You literally can go on Amazon or whatever you go to, eBay, and just buy a blood sugar kit. What they send you is like a little machine reader thing, and then these little microchips and these little stabby things, lancets. And so what you do is you do a little finger prick on your finger. A drop of blood will come out, and you put it on the end of this chip, which is inserted into a machine. And it goes, please insert the blood sample, and you do, and then it counts down, and it goes, this is your score. So I don't know, how much do tests normally cost, blood tests? $50 or something each?
Yeah.
This is like 100 tests for $50 or something like that. So it's something you can do very cheaply, easily, as often as you want. What is hypoglycemia? Hypoglycemia is lack of sugar at the cells. And remember, this is testing the blood. It's not 100% the same. So you may do a blood test. It may say your blood sugar is not too low, and you may still have all the symptoms. I've also come across people saying anecdotally, doctors saying that they've noticed that patients get hypoglycemic symptoms when their blood is nowhere near maybe the low end of the range that should be low, especially if they're used to their blood sugar being high. So if they were in a situation of diabetes or pre-diabetes, and then they managed to get their blood sugar to what might be considered textbook optimal in an ideal world, they actually have hypoglycemic symptoms. This could be for the reason they think, which is that the person has just kind of adjusted psychologically to having that amount of blood sugar, or it could also be maybe more the kind of thing that I said, which is maybe less of it is getting into the cells. So it's there in a reasonable amount in the blood, but it's there in a too low amount in the cells. I think that's distinctly possible. And explaining that and why that would happen, it takes us more into the area of insulin resistance. So that's another possibility. Now, there is another test you can do that is rarely done, but which is definitely great. And it's more relevant to insulin resistance, but it's still relevant to this, I would say, if you only have hypoglycemia. And it is an insulin test. It just blows my mind how infrequently insulin is tested. Now, I know I talk a lot about thyroid, for instance, and how that's not tested enough, but something's tested for it more often. And it's much cheaper and easier to find a test for, say, thyroid to do for yourself. It's kind of cheaper and easier even to do a test of B vitamins and stuff than it is to do insulin. Insulin, despite the fact that a lack of it is one of the top 3 to top 5 chronic diseases that kill people in the world, and despite the fact that an excess of insulin is considered to be one of the main drivers for weight gain, especially around the middle of the body, and one of the main drivers for premature aging, as we've talked about a bit and we'll talk about more later. Given that that's the case, the fact that it's so hard to test for it is crazy. Now, I've heard some people talk about how, this or that test is actually better for insulin than insulin. But here's the thing. None of those alternatives that they say are routinely tested either. All they ever seem to test is glucose, usually fasting glucose, or the HbA1c, which I know you guys seem to call A1c. And why is that? I think it's, the charitable explanation why, the non-conspiracy reason why, is because of what I said near the beginning, which is that too much insulin is not life-threatening and too much sugar is. And so the test is all about, how's your sugar? Is your sugar too high? Has it been too high in the last few months? Is it too high now? Is it too high when you're fasting? That's what they're concerned about. They're not concerned about, is it too low? Because your adrenal glands are going to kick in. It will go back up again. Don't worry about it. So it's probably just a bit out of date, as so much of medicine is. I say that it's becoming quite popular now, this idea that too much insulin is bad for us. But it's really popular in the world that I'm in and that you're in, Chrissy. It's probably not really popular with the average, general practitioner yet that you meet. But I think it will be. That one will become mainstream, I think. So hopefully insulin testing will be a lot easier. Anyway, how is this relevant? Well, as I said, they usually do fasting insulin. So if you're getting the sugar at a level in your blood that tells you shouldn't be having hypoglycemic symptoms, and yet you are, one thing that you can test is how high your insulin is, especially when it's fasting. That test seems to be much more easily available. If it is medium, and certainly if your insulin is high, based on the reference range when you're fasting, but I'd say even medium, because reference range is always based on averages, and people on average have insulin resistance in this day and age. But certainly if it's high on the reference range, then that means your body might be having insulin resistance, meaning the insulin is no longer effective enough at taking glucose out of the blood and putting it into the cell. And so that's why you could have a blood sugar result that is considered optimal or even high sometimes, and yet feel as if you have hypoglycemia because the insulin is not working correctly. So that's an additional test that you can do. What's really good to do if you want to go test crazy is even to do both. So you do fasting, blood sugar, and insulin, and then you can compare them both. And you can go, well, if my blood sugar is low and my insulin is low, then okay, that's just hypoglycemia. But if my blood sugar is normal and insulin is low, then that's a whole other conversation we'll talk about next. That's more unusual. If my blood sugar is normal, but my insulin is medium or high, then maybe the problem is insulin resistance causing the feelings of hypoglycemia rather than classic hypoglycemia, which would be indicated by low sugar in the blood.
Good distinctions. It's sounds like a little bit of a minefield, but only because we don't have this little box on us that tells us exactly what's going on.
Yeah, and that's another thing, sorry, that you just mentioned that. There is the continual glucose monitor, right? So these are available. They're not actually that expensive anymore. Used to be you have to like qualify with a certain level of sickness for them. These days you can get them privately. You can get them at a reasonable price. So if you really want to know what's going on with your blood glucose level, it'll tell you, some of them will update every minute, 24 hours a day, right? At any time. And you can also see it and you can track it with an app and, did my sugar go down a lot after I exercise? Did it go up after that meal? How was it during my sleep? Oh, I woke up then and my sugar was low and then it went high. Maybe that was stress making it happen. Like you can really get into it and really get granular with those. I haven't done it myself, but I know that it's available and a lot of people swear by it. They say it's great.
Yeah, I know. I've looked into it. I haven't quite taken that leap yet, but this has been very good so far. So then it's just going into this as well, which we have discussed, the big role that, food and fueling your brain, fueling your body takes, the role that takes and watching that. I was going to say, there are things that we can do to prevent it, stop it from happening per se beyond food, but it kind of sounds like that's really the big thing. And I know we're going to get into recommendations in a second. So that might all fit in and tie into this space, because it's like looking at it, and I know we're, insulin resistance, we're going to get to that in the next part, but like, is this something that somebody needs to live with forever, or can they, are there ways to prevent it? What are your recommendations here?
Well, I'll answer if it's if they have to live with it forever first. So with this one, I really think it depends on your definition of like having it or not having it. I remember seeing that before with diabetes. Some people claim you can cure diabetes. Some people claim you can't. The people who claim, what I noticed, again, I try to work out, when one is right rather than deciding who is right. And so what I noticed is if you define cure diabetes as I can keep my blood sugar under control if I have a certain healthy lifestyle, then you can cure it. If your definition of curing diabetes is I can keep my blood sugar going under control and go back to exactly the same unhealthy diet and habits I had before, then you can't cure it. So both of them are right, depending on their definition. With this, I would say it's similar-ish. It depends on your definition. Can you go back to, forgetting to eat for extended periods of time, living your whole life in stress, and eating poorly when you do eat and never having any symptoms of hypoglycemia? Probably not. But can you never have symptoms of hypoglycemia again? Yes. So it really depends on how you look at it, I would say. In terms of what to do about it, let's give the recommendations now, at least some of them. So, based on everything I've said, I hope it's become clear why I would say there's like 3 phases to this, how to deal with this, how to resolve, because it's not curing, as I said, you can't go back to the bad life, but how to resolve the symptoms. As I said, I don't like the common recommendation, and I don't like the keto intermittent fasting recommendation overall because of the limitations that they have and the fact they may not suit everyone. But if either of those things suit you, enjoy. The thing that I enjoy more is the other option, which is so let's talk about food is one thing. Just keeping insulin low or medium is another thing. So not letting it get high. Not letting insulin get high is another thing. And then lowering stress chemicals to a balanced level and not an excessive level is the third thing. Because any of those 3 things can throw it off, right? Go too long without eating anything. That can trigger the whole roller coaster. Insulin goes too high. That can trigger the roller coaster. Stress chemicals go too high. That can trigger the roller coaster. Dealing with any one of those three can be enough to make you feel better. But dealing with all three of those will guarantee you feeling better, from my understanding and experience. So, food is really, really big. The great thing about this to me is I didn't understand a lot of what I've been teaching in these videos back when I used to give this advice to people 10 years ago. But the advice still stands. So that's great. I found that's often the case with when I used to teach stuff is I didn't fully understand why it was a good idea. I just knew it was, and sure enough. Okay, so what am I talking about? My belief is that a balance of macronutrients in a proportion that suits you every meal is ideal. What are the macronutrients? They are protein, carbohydrate, and fat. We might get into more detail about exactly why we do it that way in the next episode. But in a nutshell, we talked about why you want to have some carbohydrates, right? If there's no carbohydrates, your body has to use stress to make them or release them from storage. So there has to be some carbohydrates. Why does there have to be any protein? First of all, because your body needs protein. It's the building block for a lot of your body. Second of all, it will reduce the speed at which the carbohydrates are taken up, which is really a key thing. And then fat. What's the benefit of fat? So it is a lot like, this is like blood sugar 101. A lot of people have heard of glycemic index and glycemic load, right? So what's the glycemic index? Glycemic index is basically a measurement of how fast will this turn into glucose and get into my bloodstream. So some things that are sugars that are really broken down, often starches actually are the biggest culprits for this. White rice and baked potato are like classic examples. They have the highest glycemic index because even though they're very long chains of sugar, they're very long chains of simple sugar. It's just glucose, forming a starch. And the body can very quickly turn that into just glucose. With other things, there's other sugars. There's sucrose, there's fructose, there's mannose, there's lactose, there's other things, and they break down more slowly. And then you have the long chains of carbohydrates, which break down slower still. And once the chains of carbohydrates get really big, that's called fiber. And so they are so big and so long that often your body can't break them down at all, which is why they're a fiber. They're something that feeds the organisms in you, in the case of soluble fiber, or just moves right through you, kind of acts like a brush in the case of insoluble fiber. But all of that's ultimately carbohydrate, right? And that's why sometimes you see on nutritional labels, it will say like carbohydrates, 10, out of which 6 sugars and 4 fiber, something like that. So the glycemic index is how quickly it gets into the sugar in your bloodstream. The glycemic load is that times how much there is, which is an important thing because when people heard about the glycemic index, they were like, I can't have a teaspoon of honey because it's high in the glycemic index, but I can have like a whole bowl full of, beans because they're low on the glycemic index. And it's like, it's not quite as simple as that because even though beans break down a lot more slowly into glucose, if you have a lot more of them, there's still a lot of glucose overall. And then it's still quite a lot of glucose per period of time that it's broken down. So that's the glycemic load. It's amount of it times where it is in the index. Does that make sense?
I understand the glycemic index pretty well. It's just the load. Yeah, that's kind of escaping me a little bit.
Okay. So something of so if you understand glycemic index, something of a glycemic index of 100 would have the same impact ultimately on your blood sugar. 10 grams of it would have the same impact on your blood sugar as 20 grams of something of glycemic index of 50.
Yeah, understand.
So that's the glycemic load.
Okay.
It's amount of it times what the glycemic index is.
Got it. Okay.
Okay. So we want to be aware of that glycemic load. We want to have some carbohydrates, like I talked about, but we don't want the glycemic load to be too high. If it's very low glycemic index, then we can have more carbs. If it's very high glycemic index, then we can have less carbs. Generally recommended, have low glycemic index, have more, but still be aware not to have a crazy amount, right? How much should you have? It really depends on you, and genetics are a big part here. We have our carbohydrate report, one of the other ones that we have in our blood sugar collection. Some people are more farmer genes, meaning that they've kind of adapted to agriculture. Yeah, like you, Chrissy. They've adapted to the agricultural age where human beings started growing a lot of grains and other carbs. Some people are more hunter-gatherer genealogy, where they really haven't adapted to that abundance of starch, especially. They may have adapted to fruits to some degree because they've been available for a lot longer in significant quantities, but even that, tends to be seasonal. So they're more adapted to a lot of protein and fat. They tend to do better on that kind of diet, the hunter-gatherers. And that's one of the other reasons why you might feel better on that ketosis or not. If you're that hunter-gatherer type, you'll do better on a ketogenic diet, probably. That's probably the biggest predictor of that, is that genetic report, I would say. Because the genetics really are the key factor rather than the, lifestyle. And so, you want to have a decent glycemic load of carbohydrate. You want to have a decent amount of protein just to meet your requirements. And you want to have a decent amount of fat. Why? Fat reduces the glycemic index. So this gets a little bit complicated again. But basically, people act as if, I don't know, whatever the food, dates, rice, potatoes, that they have this glycemic index no matter what. But the reality is, if you have any of the things I just said with a load of butter or a load of cream or a load of vegetable oil or nuts or whatever, the glycemic index is going to be way, way, way lower, because the glycemic index is how quickly does the glucose get into the bloodstream, and the fat will massively, depending on the amount, but not that much fat is required to massively slow down how quickly that fat gets into the bloodstream. So that's the glycemic index. The other thing that slows the glucose getting into the bloodstream too quickly is fiber. This is one of the justifications for a high fiber diet, which makes sense. Is a high fiber diet always a good thing? No. If people have excess of, especially pathogenic, but even any organisms in their intestinal tract, then they feed on fiber and they can create more gas, and this can create more endotoxin, more inflammation. This is a controversial area that I won't dig into too deeply today, but fiber is not always good. I think I talked about it in the digestion episode, but it is good for blood sugar. So you want some fiber and you want some fat. For me, I like to have 20% of calories coming from protein, 40% from fat, 40% from carbs, something like that. If I have too much coming from fat, I notice I feel hypoglycemic pretty much straight away, for the reason I said earlier, because there's insulin being released without any carbs, which is lowering blood sugar even more. If I do the opposite, if I have large amounts of carbs and not enough fat, then I will feel hypoglycemic before I get really hungry. So maybe 3, 4, 5 hours after a meal, I'm not really grumbling in my belly hungry yet, but my energy's starting to get low because I've had a bit of a spike, because I had too much of a glycemic load. When I have more fat, it prevents that. I say that not to talk about myself, but to see what you relate to, right? If you relate more to having a crash as soon as you eat, then I would suggest adding more carbs. If you have more of a crash too soon after you eat, 2, 3, 4, 5 hours after you eat, then I would say that is often due to too many carbs. So that's how I would try and find the right balance. The type of fat you use is important. I'm a huge fan of coconut oil, and especially MCT oil, because it has this instant energy that your body can use for fuel that doesn't require the same amount of processing. And in the case of MCT, which does exist to some degree in coconut oil anyway, that's where it comes from, it also has ketones. So it literally gives your brain instant fuel as well. So it's the main type of fat I consume now. I will say I avoided this for years, despite hearing how good it was in theory, because I never liked I don't like the smell of coconut, but I started to get odorless organic coconut oil. And so there's no smell to it. There's no taste to it. I actually found out those things that cause the smell are like certain chemicals that actually are not 100% good anyway. So I think for me, it was something that wasn't agreeing with me. I didn't want it. So I'm just saying, if you hear that recommendation and go, oh, I've heard that before, oh, I don't like it, try that. Try having the odorless type. It's not extra virgin or whatever, which is what people think is what they want. But actually, to me, it's way, way better. Tip with MCT oil as well, which I'd actually be... when I first tried MCT oil, it was like on its own, and often it would, burn my throat, give me gastrointestinal disturbance, even make me feel kind of dizzy, all stuff I'd heard from other people before. Then I started having it, and it was just totally fine. I quickly upped it, and now I have like several tablespoons a day. And then I saw this post recently of someone saying, God, if I had that, I would be on the toilet all day. I was like, yeah, why doesn't that happen to me? Is it just because I'm used to it? And then I saw a nutritionist say that if you have MCT oil heated up along with liquids, for some reason it doesn't have any of that negative effect. And I realized that's actually how I always do it. I always have it in blended, or not blended, but soup. I always have it in soup. So it's always warm and with liquid. And so that's a tip for MCT oil. Again, if you've tried it, don't like it, disagreed with you. And I think, the original recommendation for MCT oil was with coffee, right? So again, with a hot liquid. But I prefer to have it with food. And that's how I do it, with hot liquid. Liquid, even a sauce, you can add it to pasta, curry, whatever, something like that. Okay, so diet. The combination of those macronutrients, as I just said. You must eat within an hour of waking up if you have hypoglycemia. To me, this is non-negotiable. Now, have I just admitted earlier there is a completely opposite way of looking at this, which is valid? Yes. Right? So if you don't have an issue with stress chemicals, particularly, then can you intermittent fast? Can you skip breakfast? Sure. To be honest, I still don't know why you would, because I think the correct meal to skip if you want to lose weight, which is what most people do when they're intermittent fasting, is dinner. There is definitely a lot of evidence that skipping dinner is better, but a lot of people kind of poo-poo that. I would at least say there is no evidence that that breakfast is better than skipping dinner. So you can either believe it makes no difference or that skipping dinner is better. There's no evidence that skipping breakfast is ever better. I think when people skip breakfast, again, sometimes it's valid. Some people genuinely have a tendency for low stress chemicals. And that's actually overseen partly by this COMT gene, which we talked about before. The COMT gene is the one that breaks down stress chemicals. If you're COMT fast, if you have a tendency to break down stress chemicals fast, you'll probably love intermittent fasting in the morning, and you'll probably love having a big coffee in the morning with MCT oil, because you don't have an issue with too much stress chemicals. You have an issue with not enough stress chemicals a lot of the time, at least in terms of how you feel. So I can understand, right? But if that works for you, I've already said that, then it works for you. But I'm talking to all the people it doesn't work for. And in that case, I would say you want to eat within an hour of waking up. Try it if the other systems haven't worked for you. Now, here's the thing. You're not going to want to try it. Everyone with hypoglycemia doesn't have appetite in the morning. It's pretty much like a universal rule. At the very least, some people still will because they're doing very physically demanding things, because they've got very good digestion. But at the very least, you won't have as much appetite. And if it's really bad, not only will you not have appetite, you might well have nausea in the morning. Where does that come from? It comes from an excess of stress chemicals, again. And actually all of them do that, even dopamine. Even though dopamine is the chemical of desire, it doesn't, funnily enough, really lead to a desire for food specifically. And that's why when people really have high dopamine because of drugs, it almost always kills appetite. So all the stress chemicals reduce appetite. So the time when you're most likely to have blood sugar so low that your body is producing a lot of stress chemicals to cope with it is when you first wake up. Because you likely haven't eaten at least before you went to sleep. Many people haven't eaten for a lot longer than that still, right? Maybe they ate at 6 p.m., they went to bed at 10 p.m., they're now waking up at 6 a.m. So it's been 12 hours without any food, right? The longest you've been without food is almost certainly when you wake up. Maybe you want to go for longer without it if you really want to increase your stress chemicals. But if you don't want to increase your stress chemicals, then eating as soon as possible in the way I describe is good. From my anecdotal experience, what I've seen over and over and over again with many, many clients is, because they often resist this, I often have to tell them again and again and again, when they finally did it, their blood sugar issues went away. I would say the breakfast is the most important meal of the day by far. There's also this issue that I've observed anecdotally, which is once your blood sugar is off, once it's on this roller coaster, it's pretty much impossible to fix it. You can follow all the rest of the advice, and if you skip breakfast, it won't work. You're already screwed. The only thing you can do, go to sleep, wake up again the next morning, try again, pretty much.
Reset.
Yeah. So, and of course, if you keep doing that, it'll keep getting worse very gradually over time. But yeah, so once your blood sugar is low, it's very, very important to get it into perfect balance. But when you first wake up, you have that opportunity to keep it in perfect balance by eating ASAP. A balance of all the nutrients. People often ask, by the way, oh, and those so complicated macronutrients, blah, blah, blah. I didn't follow most of that. What do I actually eat? Do I eat cereal or whatever they say, right? And I always say this, what did you have for dinner? And they always tell me some proper meal. You know, very, very few people say anything like cereal or cookies or donuts or fruits or whatever. They'll say, you know, I had some kind of protein, you know, fish or dairy or meat or maybe beans, right? Soy. I had some kind of carbs and I had some kind of fat. That's always what's in an evening meal. You know, pizza, curry, steak and chips. I mean, I don't know. What do people eat? You name it. No matter what, any evening meal you can present to me, I can say, yes, that is a combination of all three macronutrients in a reasonable balance. So why people make this difficult, I don't know. They don't want to have that in the morning. I always just eat a normal meal for breakfast. I have done that for well over a decade. You know, I hate it when you're in the Western world and you go to hotels and stuff and they just have like nothing out. And this is not something that affects the rest of the world from what I've seen. Every time I've been anywhere in Asia or anywhere in Africa counts, but the Middle East, they always just have a normal meal for breakfast available. That's they have like a large selection. And I don't know, maybe it's I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's culture or whatever, but it's a good idea, right? To have that balance. Now, having said that, in our cultures, we do have, you know, examples of that for breakfast. The traditional English breakfast you might have heard of, right? And bacon and eggs and beans and sausages and mushrooms and tomatoes and hash browns or something like that, right? That's all free. Is it the healthiest version? No, but it will balance your blood sugar. And it might be healthy if it's all organic and well-sourced and all the rest of it. So I know that practical question's coming, so I'll just answer that.
All right, Elwin. Okay, so that's breakfast covered. So what about the rest of the meals of the day? I mean, like, you know, because there's a whole gamut of stuff, like eating frequent. There's some people that don't like eating frequently. There's some people that like spacing it out. I mean, played around with both. Then also for me too, it's like trying to find the protein source, because sometimes I don't always want to eat meat, but I don't always want to eat egg white, and I'm trying to stay away from dairy at times as well. So talk to me.
Protein is tricky. You want to at least get some proteins with your food, but that doesn't always mean animal. Doesn't always mean meat and fish or eggs, as you say. It can mean dairy. You know, that's another example, still animal-ish. And it can even mean, you know, seeds especially tend to be high-ish in protein. Pulses, which means beans and lentils and stuff like that. So beans and pulses at their best tend to be like 1 part protein to 2 part carbs. So you're probably not going to want to have beans with loads of carbs like rice or, you know, corn chips or something like that. But certainly if it's mainly beans as your source of carb and protein, then that could potentially work. Ditto seeds have a lot of fat in relation to protein. Probably one of the best in that regard is hemp seed. It's got quite a lot of protein compared to fat. But still, You certainly wouldn't want to have any other fat if you wanted to keep those two balanced. But it is trickier to do it plant-based to get enough protein. Everyone who's into plant protein will disagree with that. They'll talk about how the human need for protein is actually fairly small. I know it's quite a contentious issue. I'm not going to argue about the pure need for protein, but I'm talking about it from this blood sugar balancing point of view. And you do actually see certainly not a lower incidence of pre-diabetes, insulin resistance, and even diabetes in vegetarian or vegan people. And in fact, the culture in the world is probably the most strongly plant-based, or at least non-meat-based, would be India. And you certainly see a lot of people with issues with blood sugar there, despite not eating any animal foods. So plant foods, or exclusively plant foods, there's no protection of it. So anyway, yeah, with protein, assuming you're not, vegan, the other option is just to vary them, Chrissy. So I'm happy to have the same thing every meal, but I know a lot of people prefer some variety, and that's absolutely great. And then, so get the variety, right? So in one meal have cheese, and another meal have shellfish, and another meal have red meat, another meal have white meat. There's loads of variation within that as well. And you might end up in a rhythm there that you're comfortable with, right? You might like eggs in the morning, you might like chicken or fish during the day, and you might like more like a steak or something like that at night, for instance, right? So it might be something like that works for you as well. But yeah, let's talk about how often. This is a really big one. So first of all, you want to eat when you're hungry, not based on some kind of timetable, not based on because I said eat every X amount of hours, or you should wait this long, or you should make sure you do it this quickly. As I said, the exception to that is breakfast. When you wake up in the morning, if you're running high on adrenaline, you probably aren't going to be hungry, and you should try and get yourself to eat something anyway. But the rest of the day, it should be based on hunger. But here's the thing. How long it takes you to get hungry will be strongly influenced by the macronutrient content and the total portion content of what you ate previously. So in this case, let's say breakfast. So if you had a breakfast with a lot of carbohydrate and very little fat, you're much more likely to get hungry again sooner than if you have a breakfast with the opposite, with a lot of fat. Now, having said that, if you have a meal with like a keto meal with lots of fat and no carbohydrate, you might still get hungry again because your body's like, I still want carbs. Where are the carbs? You forgot last time. Let's try again. But let's say if you do like a fairly low carb, high fat, that's probably the best meal to have. And then always high protein. That's probably the best meal to have to be able to go the longest without eating, if you want to go a long time without eating. If you don't want to go a long time without eating, then kind of go the opposite way. And of course, portions, I mean, I would hope it almost goes without saying, but I'll just say it so no one thinks I've missed it. Obviously, the more you eat, the longer it will tend to be before you're hungry again. But I'd actually say the carb fat, especially ratios, are more important to how long it takes to get hungry rather than just pure portions. I mean, there's extremes of that. Obviously, if you just eat one peanut, one grape, you're not going to last very long. But assuming we're talking about, a reasonable amount, we're talking about a small breakfast or a big breakfast, then I would say the ratio of carbs to fat is even more important. So anyway, okay, so I would say you can kind of choose how long it is before you're hungry again. When I craft a meal for myself, and I maybe am making it sound more arty than it is because I usually have the same thing, and so it's very easy. But I will often consider, like, let's say that 5 or 6 hours later, I have a meeting and I know I'm going to have to wait 7 or 8 hours before, or I'm traveling or something like that. I'll put more fat in the meal to make sure that I can last that long. And let's say it's the opposite. Let's say that I know I'm going out for dinner and I'm going to be expected to eat again in only 4 hours, then not only will I have a smaller portion, I'll also make sure to have less fat in there to make sure that I'm hungry again by then. So that's one of the ways that you can control it. For me, it's like there's always a reasonable amount of what would you call them, complex carbs. And then it's just a decent amount of protein, and it's just a question of and how much fat is going to go in there. Now, a question might come up, well, I enjoy eating, Elwin. If I can, I'd like to eat often, right? So why can I just have small portions throughout the day as long as I do it in the balance that you say? And the answer to that is yes, you can, but I would probably prefer not to personally, and I would recommend not to unless you are really, really, really physically active. Like if you are literally not just moving around on your feet all day, but if you're lifting heavy stuff up, maybe climbing up and down stairs all day, like doing real exertion. If you do house removal, say, or something like that, where you are constantly picking stuff up and moving around, climbing, then sure, if you want to eat 5, even 6 meals a day, smaller meals a day, because you just need that much fuel, then fair enough. So that's that caloric demand. But even in that case, I would say try and get it down to 4 or 5 instead of 5 or 6. So why have I got this emphasis towards less? Is it just because I'm biased against eating? No, it's because, first of all, if you eat every 2 hours, when are you going to drink water in a way that your body is going to absorb it and it's not going to interfere with digestion? Because even if you have a small portion, it takes a certain amount of time for the stomach to finish processing it and for it to be empty again. If you drink anything that is not, let's say, highly acidic, i.e. water or any other drink, milk or whatever, before your stomach's finished emptying, it will definitely interfere with digestion. So I always wait at least 2+ hours, usually 2.5 hours, unless it was a very small meal, before I drink water again. Can you get away with a bit beforehand? Of course you can, especially if you have a good digestion. This is just ideal. So it's ideal. And a lot of people, they don't get thirsty for a while after they eat. So it's just practical. I mean, if you do get thirsty half an hour after you eat, fair enough. That's probably not ideal because you're going to drink and it's going to interfere with your digestion. But if you've got a great digestion, maybe it doesn't matter enough for you to notice. So that's okay. But the water is also going to be better absorbed, or the liquid, let's say, is going to be better absorbed if your stomach is empty. Not just the food is going to be better absorbed. So given that ideally you want to wait at least 2, maybe 2.5 hours after eating before you drink, how are you supposed to stop yourself from getting dehydrated if you're eating every 2 to 3 hours? It's actually very, very difficult. It's possible because you can literally drink as you are preparing the next thing. But unless people are very coordinated, people often forget to drink. Some people forget to eat as well, but forgetting to drink is way more common. So dehydration is a big issue. Here's the other thing. The symptoms that people associate with hypoglycemia often are actually dehydration because they're fairly similar, right? They're both a big impact on the nervous system and on the body's ability to produce energy when you're dehydrated or when you're lacking sugar. So like sugar, oxygen, water, maybe salt we could put as 4th place. These are like the basics that your body needs to function, that your cells need to function and produce energy. So as soon as you're getting lower in any of them, the symptoms are similar-ish to some degree. So that's another thing. If you're feeling dizzy and shaky and all the rest of it, 2 hours, 3 hours after a meal and you feel like you need to eat again, definitely first drink some water and see if it helps. If it doesn't, great, still eat. But so anyway, that's one reason. But I know some people say with that, well, being a bit uptight about that, when I drink water when I'm thirsty. Okay, so here's the other point. All the people who recommend fasting, who talk about how beneficial it is, are not wrong. They're actually right. It is beneficial to be in a catabolic state at least some of the time, and they would argue a lot of the time, because that is where your body does its detoxification processes more than any other time. That's where your body goes into this mode called AMPK, which is actually also a very important mode for reducing insulin sensitivity, extending lifespan. So that is when your body does its apoptosis, which is where your immune system gets rid of the cells which may have mutated in ways that could be dangerous, which may just be senescent, meaning like not functioning, just kind of zombie-like, which may have been invaded by a virus, which may have been damaged by a toxin, which may be almost perfect, but it's just time for them to be replaced because they're too old and their replication of the DNA is not as good as it used to be. All kinds of reasons why cells need to be destroyed. And when we're always eating, we don't give a chance for that to happen. So that's the other reason that I prefer to make it, 5 or 6 hours. Now, it could even be 8 hours, you could say. But then, so if you wake up, say, 8 a.m. and you're eating by 9 a.m., then if you're waiting 8 hours, that's 5 p.m., which means the next time would be 1 a.m., which is too late. So the only issue that I have with making 8 hours is then you're only going to have 2 meals. And if that suits you, then fair enough. But for many people, that might stimulate the hypoglycemia again because it's too long and then the stress hormones kick in. No matter how much you eat and how much fat you eat at a meal, there comes a point that's too much for your digestive system to deal with. And there comes a point where no matter what you've eaten, your blood sugar still starts to get low and your body will still create stress chemicals in response. So I find the 5 to 6 hours sweet spot. But as I say, it does vary, of course, between people. If you're very sedentary and your metabolism is slow, which actually is an issue, but we talk about that in the metabolism issue episode, you should check that out. Then 2 meals a day is probably actually perfect for you, right? And maybe 8 hours apart is good, even if you have hypoglycemia. As I said, on the other hand, if you're extremely busy, if you, not just mentally and figuratively, but with your body, if your body's moving and doing difficult things like climbing and lifting, then 4 or 5 plus times a day might actually be appropriate. So it does always depend.
Yeah, really great in that it's like figuring it out, finding and feeling into your body is a big part of, that awareness cycle. And also too, one of the things I know for me and for others that I've spoken with is then feeling how the food feels when you digest it too, and seeing what kind of responses that you're having and the impact that also has in digestion and everything else and what's going on internally there. So would you have any other recommendations because this is something that popped up when you were talking about the balance between the ratio between the protein and the carbohydrate, because you get a lot of people that may be looking at, I've been told I need to have as many grams of protein as a certain thing, so they're trying to reach that. And so how would that fit into trying to balance the ratio of the macros?
So protein, you always want high-ish, right? So the kind of highest amounts that are usually recommended, as you were just mentioning, is like 1 or even 1.5 grams per pound of body weight. The low end is usually like 1 gram per kilo of body weight per day. Some people, as I said, like maybe vegans and other people who are into slowing down the metabolism will sometimes recommend even less than that. Maybe they'll say a human's okay with 40 grams of protein a day or something. But I'd say let's use the gram per kilo as like a reasonable average between the extremes of what a human being could maybe survive with and what a human being could maybe thrive with. Something in between is about a gram per kilo. And let's say that we're having 3 meals then, right? So that's about 25, let's say, for simplicity, for the average weighted person of 70 kilo. I think that's the average weight, something like that. So that's not very much, 25 grams. It's like 100 grams of most meat. It's about 100 grams of most cheese. I think it's about, is it 2 eggs? I think something like that. It's about 150 grams of beans. It's about 100 grams of seeds, like sunflower seeds. So that's doable, like within a meal. Some people might, as I said, they go crazy with it. As you said, they may have a lot more than that. So that's like consistent. I wouldn't really vary that, except for, again, maybe with intense exercise, with the input of your, personal trainer and whatnot. If they're wanting you to have a lot of protein directly before you exercise or after, then fine. I personally don't use protein powders, not because I'm against them, because they're synthetic in theory. I don't, because none of them agree with me. Except for the collagen one, collagen peptides. That's the only one. But a lot of people don't class it as a protein powder because it's missing several amino acids. It's more of like a bone broth substitute, gelatin substitute, than I would say a true protein powder. So all the actual protein powders, like whey protein powder and pea and hemp and rice and soy, and there's even marine sometimes or whatever. They all disagree with me. When I look into it, it just seems to be that because why would it be fine in the actual food and bother you once it's a protein powder? It seems like it's going to be contaminated with a bunch of stuff. That's the likely reason why it would bother someone. So if you have one that you're happy with, that, as you said, you listen to your body and it agrees with you, great. That is another way around it. But I'm just kind of saying more the whole food way of dealing with it, with the protein. I wanted to actually mention something else related to what you said as to why I don't like to eat every 2 to 3 hours. So you want to be in a calm, non-stressed, parasympathetic, ventral vagal, as we've learned to say, instead of parasympathetic, but a calm, relaxed state before you eat, right? Just before you eat. And that's often where there's the emphasis on maybe taking a couple of breaths, certainly sitting down. It's not good to be eating while standing up or walking around. Maybe doing a little gratitude prayer that really gets you into the right state. Maybe, taking in your food, being present, spending time with loved ones, connecting. All these kind of things that are traditional in various circles are also because it's important to be relaxed. But guess what? The moment that you put the last morsel into your mouth doesn't mean right back into stress state. Now, I know it can do, and I know it does for many of us, but actually it's optimal to stay in a reasonably relaxed state for that whole time that that this food is in your stomach. So 2.5 hours, something like that. Of course, a lot of people don't do that, but a lot of people have stomach issues. A lot of people have stomach acid issues. They have reflux. They have inflammation, all the rest of it. It's like their stomach's not happy. So in an ideal world, I'm not saying you can't do anything, but should you be engaged with like really stressful activities immediately after eating? No. So again, as much as if you eat every 2 or 3 hours, the question is when are you going to drink water? It's actually not easy to fit it in. If you eat every 2 or 3 hours, when are you going to do really stressful activities? Because sometimes those need to be done. You're going to have to do it either just before you eat, which means the next meal is not going to go well, or when you've just eaten, which means the previous meal is not going to go well. So that's another reason why I would encourage more of a space between meals as a hypoglycemic, if it's okay for you. As I said, and I know some people say, well, that's bad advice, Owen, because I'm going to get really hypoglycemic if I do that. But as I said, as far as the medical community is concerned, unless you've created the hypoglycemia purposefully because of taking insulin, usually, or other kind of diabetic medication, or unless you have Addison's, which means your adrenal glands are incapable of producing enough of the stress chemicals, which will then raise your blood sugar. So unless you have those issues going on, generally the medical community is not concerned about your hypoglycemia, as you know. So it's not such a big deal to stretch it a bit just on how you feel subjectively. Probably the issue is just that it's uncomfortable to spend too long for you with you as you are right now. But if you follow all the advice that we're teaching in this episode, and then also the next episode, because the next episode we'll get into how to manage that insulin as well, which is a bit of a separate one. Today it's been more kind of managing blood sugar. Next time we'll do more about managing insulin, all the implications about what happens when that stays too high for too long and all that kind of stuff.
And just one thing I want to touch on again, because you talked about the fasting and you talked about the, being able about assisting the body with going into apoptosis, the AMPK and things like that. And say they are in this space where they do get hypoglycemic, so they do have to eat those every 4 to 5 hours. And so they're not really giving them so it's like, is that enough time for those processes to take place in between, or do there need to be longer stints in that fasting for somebody to get those benefits?
So that's a good question. So, the difference between 2 to 3 and 4 to 5 is huge. The difference between 2 and 5 is huge. Not just mathematically, but because, as I say, the amount of catabolic, apoptosis, AMPK activity that's going on if you're eating every 2 hours is almost none. The amount that could be going on after 5 hours is way more, right? So I would say, 5 hours, 6 hours, like I'm recommending, there's still plenty of catabolic activity going on. Now, of course, depends on your definition of plenty. To someone who recommends month-long fasts, there's not enough going on.
Yeah.
And so that's where, again, it's a question of compromise. It's a question of what your priorities are. And this is a tricky thing. What your priorities are, and then also what your priorities should be, given what your challenges are. So this is a tricky thing in the whole health world, is there are a lot of charlatans out there, but there are also a lot of well-meaning people out there who really do want to help, but who are giving very dogmatic advice about how to be better based on their own experience, and often based on the experience of other people, many other people that they've maybe worked with or trained with or whatever. But because of that, they kind of globalize it. They make it universal, like, therefore it's good for everyone. And there are no exceptions are often treated with hostility or ignored or something like that, because it breaks the spell of this is the thing to do. So everything I just said could apply as much to the people who say eat every 2 hours as to the people who say it's good to fast for a month, right? People on both sides will say this is the right way, and the other one is completely wrong. So I would more question, there are benefits to each. If your goal is to fire up your metabolism, if your goal is to really get into an anabolic state, you need to build muscle for whatever reason. Remember, muscle is not just showing off and going to the gym. Muscle is what your heart is largely composed of. It's what your digestive system is largely composed of. So a lack of muscle mass is one of the things that often leads to injuries, which then quickly lead to death in elderly people. So muscle is not just vanity. Muscle is an essential part of your body. It's a great predictor of longevity. So muscle is really important, right? So if you need to be in that stage of having more of muscular, and muscles also use up more energy, burn fat, which is why people who want to lose fat often pursue them. So there's so many benefits to muscle. So are you going to be in an anabolic state and put on muscle and increase your metabolism and create more cellular energy while going for a long periods of time without eating? No. Is it a good idea to go for long periods of time with eating to get in a catabolic state, burn a bunch of fuel that may be in your body, like for instance fat, and get rid of the toxins, get rid of the dead cells as a result of being heavily into that catabolic process? Do many people do that and have a really great result, maybe recover from some kind of disease, recover from some kind of crippling condition? Yes. So it's like, what's a good idea? Eating frequently or fasting for long periods of time? Both. It really depends on what your goals are. But be aware of what the benefits and also drawbacks are of each. I will say that particularly being in an anabolic state, maybe I haven't mentioned this yet. So being in an anabolic state of never being in a catabolic state absolutely is associated with reduced longevity if it's excessive. This is one of the things, this is the bodybuilder thing, right? They are trying to be as anabolic as possible. They tend to be eating really, really frequently. And I think some of the top teachers in that space these days, they acknowledge, look, if you do that, you may look great by their definition. Maybe you wouldn't agree, Chrissy. But you are not probably going to live as long unless you're on top of a lot of other things. So this thing, mTOR and AMPK, which is this anabolic genetic pathway and this catabolic genetic pathway, is absolutely true that increased AMPK, the catabolic pathway, is associated to longevity. In fact, it's so much the case, a lot of people went whole hog with that and, decided to fast extensively, regularly, and go on a pure keto diet with very low carbs and low protein, because all of that stimulates AMPK, only to ending up in like a different mess from going overly catabolic. So I know it sounds almost cliche, but balance really is the key, unless you're very imbalanced already. And then you got to do the thing that will bring you back into balance. So if you've been heavily anabolic, putting on more and more weight, eating constantly, never giving your body a chance to do its cleaning processes, then periods of fasting, especially under supervision, could be life-changingly beneficial for at least a while. And ditto, if you've been catabolic for a long time, maybe you've been dieting a lot, maybe you have had digestive problems and therefore haven't been able to consume very much, maybe you're very high in stress chemicals, and that means you're not hungry that frequently, maybe you've been taking stimulant drugs or other drugs that make you not hungry, then you might need to go to the other extreme and eat really frequently to try and get your metabolism going again, right? So the thing is, we can't go from being completely imbalanced to being balanced by acting balanced. Sometimes if we're completely imbalanced, we have to go the other way to then get into a state of balance. But there's a huge difference between embracing like a fasting lifestyle or embracing a metabolism boosting lifestyle for a while because you want to get back into balance versus like, this is the way to be. And I think what I see, the people with a metabolism boosting lifestyle who take it too far, is they tend to end up overweight, honestly. Because yes, it's true that when you boost your metabolism, you can eat a lot more calories without gaining weight. But you know what? It's easy to still eat too many calories when you have a really fast metabolism, unless you're really going for it in terms of physical exertion as well, like I mentioned earlier. And then on the other side, there's loads of people who, do the more fasting, calorie restriction path, who end up, really underweight, really stressed, really exhausted, really depleted, malnourished. So yeah, it really depends where you're coming from as to what direction you go to. And then even then, don't think, oh, fasting didn't work, eating frequently works, I've got to eat frequently now for the rest of my life. Like it's like getting back into balance and then ultimately staying in balance. So that's diet. How do you lower your insulin? That's a big topic, and we'll cover it more in insulin resistance, but I'll just give a few supplements because people obviously love supplements, easy fixes, and some of them actually really work very well. One of them is berberine. It's our number one seller and feel younger, and for good reason. It's very similar to the drug metformin. It doesn't work quite as powerfully as that, but it also has a very, very tiny fraction of the side effects that does. So, if a person is not medically mandated to do metformin, if they're not being prescribed it by a doctor and they're considering it, I would say try berberine first before you go to that, if no medical practitioner is recommending it to you. It absolutely balances blood sugar levels to various degrees, but it significantly does it, as I said, almost as powerfully as one of the most commonly prescribed drugs for that purpose. It absolutely helps to increase insulin sensitivity and reducing insulin resistance, which should stop insulin getting too high, which is what we were talking about. There is something else called inositol, which used to be considered a B vitamin, which is quite powerful in that regard as well. And I'll just leave it there for now. We'll talk more about that when we get into insulin resistance. And then the third one, stress. And for that one, I'll say we'll get more into that with insulin resistance, but there is also an episode that we've done dedicated to how to reduce your stress. So as I said earlier, it's quite possible, especially if you know you have hypoglycemia, you suspect you have hypoglycemia, that the number one reason that you are stressed in the first place is actually blood sugar. But it could be many other things, and we cover that in the stress episode. It could be a mental habit, like I talked about earlier. It could be low thyroid hormone. It could be low vitamin B1. It could be low progesterone, low testosterone. It could be so many things. So absolutely look into that episode if you relate, especially to that tendency to maybe overstress when your blood sugar is low. And again, sign of that might be fasting doesn't agree with you. Then make sure you check out that episode as well.
Beautiful, Elwin. This has been highly, highly informative and a lot for everyone to take away from. So, everyone, thank you for your time. And please do stay tuned for the next episode on insulin resistance, which will be following on shortly from this one. And as always, please make sure you hit the like and subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. And we'll see you next time. I hope you enjoyed that episode. And if you did, I want to tell you about a way that you can support the podcast while also getting great deals on high quality supplements that Elwin and I personally use, and that's Feel Younger. What I love about Feel Younger is that they have great quality products with minimal fillers at a very affordable price. You can call their customer support team 20 hours a day, 7 days a week, and in my experience, they're very helpful and friendly. And the thing I love most of all is the amazing descriptions that Elwin has written about each product category on that topic. And each product has so much education on it that I've actually learned more from reading the descriptions than I have from a lot of articles. So to support the podcast, please use Feel Younger for all your supplement needs. And to let them know we sent you, use promo code REJUVENATEME for 20% off your first order at feelyounger.net. That's 20% off your first order using promo code REJUVENATEME at feelyounger.net.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed that video. You may have noticed I recommended a few different videos in that episode, and one of the ones I recommend is just here, if you want to click there, or another one I recommend is just below, if you want to click on that one and watch that next.